Was Nancy Guthrie in this car, caught on a Ring surveillance camera the night she was kidnapped? Video obtained by Fox Digital shows a dozen cars triggering the camera's motion detectors as they sped by in the hours after her abduction.
The night is still, the kind of still that settles over Tucson in the early hours of February, when the desert cold presses down against the city and the streets go quiet and there is nothing moving except, perhaps, the wind. The neighborhood sits in that silence. Porch lights glow, a street lamp flickers once, then holds, and somewhere on a residential street, on a property with a circle driveway laid in decomposed granite, something is happening that no one is awake to see. Car engine is running. Should not be there. That detail, a car where there should be no car, an engine idling in the black hours of a February morning, is the kind of thing that sounds small when you say it out loud. And yet, everything that follows, every question that investigators would ask, every thread that the FBI would pull at over the next 67 days and beyond, begins in that moment. A car, an engine, a driveway made of loose, shifting granite, and an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie, who was there one moment and then was not. This is the case that gripped a community. This is the disappearance that would push a former FBI forensic specialist to examine drone footage frame by frame, looking for something that may or may not still exist. This is a story about what investigators found, what they may have missed, and why the answer to the whole mystery might have come down to something as ordinary as the surface of a driveway. The details that follow are drawn from the investigation itself. From the forensic analysis conducted by Maureen O'Connell, a former special agent with the FBI's evidence response team. From the physical evidence recovered in the days after Nancy vanished. And from the haunting possibility that the most critical piece of evidence in this entire case was present briefly in the early hours of February 1st, and that no one captured it in time.
Was the initial plan to pull the car around back, and then they had to abort mission, and the driver came up on the circle driveway instead, and then they went out the front door? Part of the plan was to remove Nancy via the front door.
Before any of that can be understood, it is necessary to understand Nancy Guthrie herself. She was 84 years old. She lived alone in her home in Tucson, a desert-style property situated in a quiet, low-crime residential neighborhood. By every account available, Nancy was a woman of routine. She knew her neighborhood. She trusted it. Her days followed a pattern, not unusual for someone of her age and independence, and that pattern was visible to anyone paying attention. Her home sat back from the street, accessible from the front by a circle driveway, the kind designed to allow a vehicle to pull in, turn, and pull out without reversing. Practical detail, an architectural feature that thousands of properties across the American Southwest share without a second thought. It would later become one of the most discussed elements of the entire investigation. The back of the property had gate access. The neighborhood around her was calm. Neighbors were close but not intrusive, the kind of proximity that creates a sense of safety without genuine surveillance. People knew each other by sight, by the general shape of daily life, but not by the precise hours of each other's mornings. And in the early hours of February, that gap in awareness would matter enormously. Nothing in Nancy's life on the surface suggested she had been identified as a target. Nothing announced that her routine had been studied, her schedule mapped, her vulnerability assessed by someone watching from a distance. And yet, the evidence that emerged in the hours and days following her disappearance pointed unmistakably to planning, to patience, to someone who had looked at Nancy Guthrie's quiet life and calculated exactly when and how to move. That realization, that this was not a spontaneous event, is what makes this case so unsettling for investigators and for the community that knew her, because it means that somewhere in the days or weeks leading up to February 1st, while Nancy went about her routine, someone else was building a plan around it. Hi viewers, before we go any further into this investigation, there is something that has been on our minds throughout this case. If you lived in a quiet neighborhood like Nancy's, would you ever suspect something was off? Or would the calm fool you too? Drop your honest answer in the comments below. We want to know how you see it. The night in question is established by investigators as falling within a window stretching from approximately midnight to 4 in the morning on February 1st. That 4-hour stretch is when the movement happened. That is when a vehicle was in or near Nancy Guthrie's property.
But this one is getting intense attention. It was taken at 2:36 a.m. That's 48 minutes after the kidnapped suspect was caught on camera at Nancy's front door. It's also 8 minutes after her pacemaker disconnected from her cell phone, which is the moment she is thought to have been taken from her house.
That is when her doorbell camera captured something that would become one of the earliest and most examined pieces of evidence in the case. A figure wearing gloves. The gloves are significant. They are not the detail of a panicked or impulsive person. They are the detail of someone who understood the concept of trace evidence, who had at minimum a working awareness of how physical contact leaves behind information that investigators can recover. The presence of gloves does not make a perpetrator invisible. It does, however, signal intentionality. It signals a person who thought about what they were doing before they did it. From the front of the property, from the circle driveway, under whatever ambient light was available in those hours, a vehicle was involved in what happened to Nancy Guthrie. That much the evidence supports. The exact nature of what occurred, the sequence of moments, the precise path taken before and after. Those are the questions that 67 days of investigation would attempt to answer, with varying degrees of success. One question, however, would rise above all others. Maureen O'Connell is a former special agent with the FBI's evidence response team. Her background is in forensic analysis, tire impressions, trace evidence recovery, crime scene reconstruction. She is not a detective in the traditional sense. Her work is in the physical record that a scene leaves behind. What surfaces show, what materials retain, what the ground itself can testify to when the right questions are asked of it. When she examined the evidence related to this case, she came to a conclusion that reframed the entire investigation. Everyone had been focused on the back gate. The reasoning was logical enough. The back gate offered concealment. It offered a path that would keep a vehicle and its occupants out of direct sight lines. If someone had planned to take Nancy Guthrie out of her home quietly, the back entrance seemed like the natural route. Investigators, neighbors, and media attention all gravitated toward that assumption in the early stages of the case. Maureen O'Connell looked at the evidence and came to a different conclusion. She pointed to the front, to the circle driveway, to the decomposed granite surface that caught vehicle weight and shifted under tires and, for a brief window of time, may have held the shape of exactly what had been there. A circle driveway, she explained, is engineered for efficiency. Pull in. Move forward, exit without reversing. No hesitation, no three-point turn, no delay. If a person needed to move quickly, if a plan depended on time, the front driveway was not a liability. It was an asset. And there may have been a reason the plan needed to change. Investigators and people familiar with the case have noted one particular element of that night. A neighbor's dog. The sound of barking in the early hours of February 1st. Seems on the surface like a small thing. A dog waking to something in the dark. It happens in neighborhoods everywhere. But in the context of this case, that sound may carry an outsized significance. If a plan had been set, if a vehicle had been positioned and a route had been determined, a barking dog introduces risk. It introduces the possibility of a light turning on, of a neighbor at a window, of a moment of unwanted attention. And if that risk was enough to abort the original path, if it forced a change in real time, then the circle driveway at the front of the property was not just a convenient exit. It was an improvised one. An improvised exit in the early hours of February. On a surface of decomposed granite. With a vehicle whose tires had weight and pressure and, possibly, a distinctive tread pattern pressed into the loose stone beneath them. That possibility, that the ground recorded something in those hours, is where the investigation would turn next. And it is where one of the most troubling questions of the entire case would take shape. Maureen O'Connell, examining what was available to her through drone footage and scene documentation, made a statement that has stayed with everyone who has followed this case closely. She described what she saw. She noted the surface. She noted the conditions under which tire impressions form in decomposed granite, briefly, imperfectly, but with enough definition to tell investigators what kind of vehicle had been there. And then she said something that stopped the analysis cold. She had only seen one set of tire impressions, not two. not the entry and the exit that a circle driveway by design should have produced. One set, and the implications of that single observation are significant enough to anchor the rest of this investigation. Either the evidence was there and was not collected, or something happened to it before anyone understood what they were looking at. Or the analysis of the scene, in those critical early hours when the granite surface still held its shape, was not complete. Any one of those possibilities is troubling on its own. Together, they raise a question that has no comfortable answer. If the tire impression that could have identified the vehicle was present in that driveway in the early morning hours of February 1st, and if that impression degraded or was disturbed before it was properly documented, then the single most direct physical link between Nancy Guthrie's disappearance and the vehicle that carried her away may be gone. Not hidden, not sealed in an evidence locker waiting to be processed. Gone. The investigation into Nancy's disappearance did not stop there. Other evidence was recovered. A glove was found approximately 2 miles from the property. A glove consistent with what the doorbell camera had shown, containing DNA that did not match any family member. That DNA was entered into the national database. Additional investigative resources, including the FBI's CAS team, began working through cellular data from the area, mapping every device that had been active in the vicinity during that 4-hour window. The investigation, in other words, was not standing still. But in every missing persons case, in every investigation where physical evidence forms the foundation, the first hours matter in ways that cannot be recovered later. The granite shifts, the wind moves across it, vehicles pass, foot traffic accumulates, and what was pressed into the surface in the dark hours of February 1st becomes less readable with every passing minute. Somewhere in Tucson, on a quiet property with a circle driveway, an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie disappeared. And somewhere, caught briefly in the loose stone of that driveway, there may have been the shape of the vehicle that took her. The question of whether anyone captured that shape, whether anyone looked at the ground in time, is the question that defines what comes next in this investigation. And the answer to that question is not what anyone hoped it would be. This case is still unfolding. The evidence recovered, the forensic threads still being pulled, the cellular data still being analyzed. All of it points toward answers that investigators have not yet made public. The silence from official channels is not the silence of a case gone cold. It is the silence of a case still moving, still building toward something, with names and details held close for reasons that only become clear when an arrest is made. But the driveway remains, the surface remains, and the question of what it held, and whether it was captured in time, is a question that this channel will continue to follow as this investigation develops. If you need to know what the evidence that was recovered can actually tell investigators, if you need to understand what a single glove found 2 miles from a crime scene can do in the hands of modern forensic science, that story is coming. The DNA, the database, the investigative method that has broken cases that once seemed impossible to solve. That is what comes next. Do not miss it. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so that when the next story drops, you are the first to know. Every case we cover is a real person, a real investigation, and a real opportunity to understand how the system works and sometimes how it falls short. If the story moved you, share it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your voice in this conversation matters. And the next story on this channel may be the one that changes how you see the world around you. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The driveway is quiet now, but someone knows what that ground held on the night of February 1st. And the investigation is not over. The glove is sitting in an evidence bag. That is where the investigation stands on the morning after Nancy Guthrie vanishes from her Tucson home. One piece of physical evidence, recovered approximately 2 miles from the property. Small, consistent with what the doorbell camera captured in the early hours of February 1st, and containing DNA from an unknown male. 2 miles. That is the distance between Nancy's circle driveway and the place where someone left a glove behind. Not buried. Not destroyed. Simply discarded, the kind of disposal that happens when a person believes distance is enough.
Is it possible that Nancy Guthrie let this person in through the front door. I'm just wondering if this person may have stepped outside the camera's view and used a voice that maybe she knew to make entry.
In a vehicle, 2 miles takes minutes. And in those minutes, whatever plan had been set in motion was either complete or nearly so. The recovery of the glove does not happen by accident. It happens because investigators move outward from the property in expanding search patterns, looking for anything that does not belong. The glove's location, its physical condition, and its visual match to what the doorbell camera recorded all point in the same direction. This is not a random find. It is a piece of the plan that did not travel as far as the person carrying it intended. What the glove cannot do on its own is close the case. Physical evidence offers fragments. It offers the beginning of a chain that investigators must extend, link by link, until it reaches something concrete. And the chain that begins with this glove runs directly into the machinery of modern forensic science. The DNA recovered from the glove is entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the national database holding genetic profiles from convicted individuals, arrestees, and crime scenes across the country. When a DNA sample enters CODIS, the system compares it against millions of existing profiles. When there is a match, it can be one of the most significant breaks an investigation receives. The limitation is one that forensic scientists are candid about. CODIS only works if the person responsible has previously been in the system. No prior arrest, no prior conviction, no prior sample on record. The search returns nothing. The DNA is real, but without a matching entry, it waits without an answer. That is where a second avenue becomes critical. Genetic genealogy. A method that has changed what is possible in cases that would otherwise have no path forward. It does not require the suspect to be in CODIS. It requires only that a biological relative, a cousin, a parent, anyone who shares enough genetic material, has submitted a DNA sample to a consumer genealogy platform. Companies like GeneMatch hold millions of voluntary submissions from people tracing their ancestry. When investigators submit an unknown DNA profile to these platforms, the algorithm searches for partial matches. Familial ones, branches of a family tree that connect, through shared genetic markers, to the person whose profile is in the evidence bag. From there, the work becomes genealogical. Investigators map family trees. They identify which members of a partially matching family fit the right age, the right location, the right profile to appear in a Tucson neighborhood in the early hours of February 1st. This method has broken cases that sat dormant for decades. In Nancy Guthrie's case, it represents one of the strongest remaining threads available. But threads take time. Family trees are not built in a day. What the public sees is the announcement when the work is finished. What investigators live with is the process. And while that process moves forward, a second track is running in parallel. The FBI's CAS team, the Cellular Analysis Survey team, works with data. Specifically, the digital record that every active phone leaves behind as it moves through a cellular network. In the hours between midnight and 4 in the morning on February 1st, every device powered on in the area surrounding Nancy's neighborhood was communicating with cell towers, logging movement, registering location. The CAS team can pull that data. They can map every device present during that window, not just residents, but phones that moved through, slowed, stopped, and departed. They can trace routes. They can identify patterns that do not match the expected behavior of a quiet neighborhood at 3 in the morning. What the cellular data has revealed in this case has not been made public. That is significant. It is not a sign that the data revealed nothing. It is a sign that investigators are holding what they have close, because someone is listening. Someone who was in that neighborhood on the night of February 1st knows exactly what they did. They know which roads they drove. They know whether their phone was in their pocket that night, and whether that decision was enough. The glove, the DNA, the cellular data, 3 threads all being pulled, and somewhere at the end of one of them is the answer this investigation needs. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. The next development in this case will not wait, and you need to already be here when it comes. Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
The Ring camera is located here, 2.5 miles from Nancy's home. The car is thought to be a Kia Soul based on its slanting roof. The Pima County Sheriff's Office says it is actively reviewing the new lead.
What do you believe investigators already know that they have not said publicly? The driveway was there all along. Not the back gate, not the perimeter, the front, the circle, the decomposed granite that sits under the tires of every vehicle that pulls into that property on an ordinary day. And that sat under the tires of a vehicle that arrived on a night that was not ordinary at all. Maureen O'Connell's work is in reading physical environments, looking at a surface and understanding what it recorded, analyzing the relationship between a vehicle, a road, a soft material, and the impression left behind when weight and motion meet the ground. When she examined the evidence in Nancy Guthrie's case, she did not arrive at the same conclusion everyone else had started with. The back gate assumption made intuitive sense. A rear entrance offers concealment. It keeps a vehicle away from the most visible portion of the property. That assumption shaped the early hours of the investigation, where people looked, what they documented, what questions they asked. But a circle driveway offers something the back gate cannot. Efficiency. A vehicle enters, moves in a forward arc, and exits without reversing. No hesitation built into the design. No moment where the driver stops, shifts, reorients. In a situation where seconds matter, where any additional time increases the risk of being seen or heard, the front driveway is not a liability. It is the better option, and something may have forced that choice. The neighbor's dog. In the window, investigators have established, midnight to 4 in the morning on February 1st, a dog was heard barking near the property. In a quiet residential neighborhood at that hour, a barking dog is not nothing, carries, and to a person positioned at the rear of the property, relying on the assumption that no one was aware of their presence, that sound introduces an immediate problem. A porch light could come on, a neighbor could step outside, a phone call could be made. The rear exit, built into whatever plan existed, suddenly carries more risk than it did moments before. So the plan changes, not in chaos, under pressure. And the decision leads to the front of the property, the circle driveway, the decomposed granite. Decomposed granite is common landscaping material across the American Southwest. It is stable enough to drive over, but it is not compacted the way asphalt or concrete is. Weight presses it down. Tires leave marks, but those marks are not permanent. They are subject to wind, foot traffic, and the movement of additional vehicles. In the hours between when a vehicle departs and when forensic personnel arrive, a surface like this changes. The critical window in any scene analysis is the first hours. That is when surfaces hold the most information. That is when tire impressions are at their sharpest. That is when the ground can still be photographed, measured, and documented in a way that holds up later. Every hour that passes after that window closes is an hour in which definition degrades. Maureen O'Connell noted something specific when she examined what was available. She saw only one set of tire impressions on that driveway, not two. A circle driveway used by a vehicle should, by design, produce evidence of both entry and exit. Two tracks in the granite, separated by the arc of the turn. One set of impressions means either the second set was never captured, or it degraded before anyone recognized what was there. A tire impression is not just a mark in the ground. It is a record of a specific vehicle at a specific moment in time. Tread pattern, where characteristics, width, depth, from one clear impression, a forensic examiner can narrow the universe of vehicle possibilities significantly. Without it, the investigation relies on other avenues. Those avenues exist, but the directness of what a tire impression match can do for a case represents something that cannot be fully replaced. This is what Maureen O'Connell was pointing to. Not a failure of the investigation as a whole, a timing problem, a window that opened and may have closed before the right people were looking at the right surface. The front driveway of Nancy Guthrie's home may hold no more information than the wind left in it. Or there may be documentation somewhere in the case file that addresses exactly what she observed. that answers the question of the missing second set of impressions with information that has not yet been made public.
Is it possible that Nancy Guthrie let this person in through the front door? I'm just wondering if this person may have stepped outside the camera's view and used a voice that maybe she knew to make entry.
Either way, the vehicle was there, the granite was there, and at least one impression was seen. The question is what that single set has already told investigators, and what they have chosen not to say yet. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This case is still moving, and the next update we cover will matter. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your read on this investigation is part of how we track it. 67 days. That number carries weight in a missing person case. It means the investigation has moved through its initial phase, through the early coverage, the community response, the first forensic work, and into the longer, quieter phase where real answers are built without press conferences. The silence from official channels in those 67 days has communicated something. Silence in an active federal investigation does not mean nothing is happening. It means information is being held close. Press releases are strategic. Details are released when they serve the investigation, and withheld when they might alert someone who needs to remain unaware of exactly what investigators know. The silence around this case reads like containment, not a wall. Active containment, which is a different thing. Moore and O'Connell was examining forensic evidence at day 67 with a specificity that does not come from a case in retreat. The CAST team was referenced in connection with ongoing cellular analysis. These are not signs of an investigation that has gone quiet. They are signs of one that is moving carefully, deliberately, toward something it is not yet ready to announce. For the community around Nancy Guthrie, that silence sits differently, because this case is not abstract to the people who live in neighborhoods like hers. A quiet residential street, a circled driveway, neighbors close enough to hear a dog bark in the night, but not close enough to see what was happening in the hours before dawn. The ordinariness of Nancy's environment is the part of this case that does not leave people easily. She was not in a situation that carried obvious external risk. She had a routine and a home and a neighborhood she trusted. And someone had studied that trust carefully enough to know exactly when it would leave her most exposed. The calculation behind this case, the mapping of a person's schedule, the assessment of their property's layout, the selection of a specific window in the early hours of a February morning, is the element that forensic analysis alone cannot fully address. Forensics can tell investigators what vehicle was there. Cellular data can tell them which devices were present. DNA can tell them whose biological material was left behind. But the behavior that preceded February 1st, the period of observation and planning that made the plan possible, lives in the record only indirectly. It shows up in the precision of what occurred, in the gloves, in the timing, in the choice of entry and exit that suggests familiarity with the property's design. Investigations of this scale do not run indefinitely without resolution. They accumulate, and then, at the point where enough threads have converged on the same answer, they move. And they move fast. Whatever the investigation holds at this stage, the shape of what is available is not small. DNA, cellular records covering a 4-hour window, a forensic analysis of a scene conducted by someone trained specifically to read what surfaces record, a genealogy process that has reached into far colder cases and produced identifications. Any one of those threads, at the right moment, closes the distance. Nancy Guthrie deserves that moment. And the people working this case have not stopped reaching for it. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. When this case breaks, it will break fast, and you will want to already know the full story of how it got there. Leave a comment. What do you think the next development in this investigation looks like? There is a vehicle somewhere. That is the fact that grounds everything. Whatever else remains uncertain. Whatever the granite of that driveway did or did not hold long enough to be captured, there is a vehicle that was at Nancy Guthrie's property in the early hours of February 1st. It exists. It has a make, a model, a tread pattern, a registration. It belongs to someone who has been carrying the knowledge of that night through every day that has followed. The investigation has not announced its conclusions because it has not yet reached the point where conclusions can be announced. But the tools available for the people working this case are real, and they are being used. The DNA in the glove waits for a match. The genealogy process maps family trees that the person responsible for this case cannot alter.
Just a question for you. A lot of our viewers, no doubt, have been reading what's out there relative to some activity recently on a Bitcoin account, not substantiated by CBS News. But for the viewer who doesn't know how that works, can money transferred in a Bitcoin account be traced to anybody?
The cellular data places specific devices at specific towers during a specific 4-hour window, and that record does not change with the passage of time. These are fixed points in an investigation otherwise full of variables. And investigators know how to use fixed points. What will not be recovered is the window. The early hours of February 1st, when the granite was freshest, when the surface of that circle driveway held whatever it held. That window is gone. Moore and O'Connell raised the question of what it contained not to assign value, but because an honest account of a case requires naming what was present and what may have been missed. The first hours of a physical scene are irreplaceable. The choices made in those hours about where to look, what to prioritize, and which surfaces deserve immediate forensic attention carry consequences that extend far beyond any single investigation. Every evidence response team that reads the analysis of this scene now carries forward a question. What are we treating as secondary that might actually be the most important record? That question has value. It does not bring Nancy home, but it makes the next investigation more careful than this one was forced to be. And there will be a next investigation. Cases like this do not exist in isolation. They sit in a larger pattern of how these events are investigated, documented, and eventually resolved. What this case has shown about timing, about surface evidence, about the way an assumption regarding a back gate can redirect attention away from a front driveway, becomes part of the institutional knowledge that shapes what happens when the next call comes in. Nancy Guthrie was an 84-year-old woman who lived her life in a quiet neighborhood in Tucson. She trusted her surroundings. She had a routine and a home and a driveway made of decomposed granite under a desert sky, and she had no indication that the last ordinary night of her known life was ending. She deserves an answer. Her community deserves one. And somewhere in the accumulated work of this investigation, in a lab, in a database, in a set of cell tower records being reviewed by someone who has not yet found the pattern, that answer is being built. The truth exists. The vehicle is somewhere. The person who drove it has not stopped existing. And the investigation has not stopped looking. When this case moves, when the thread being pulled finally reaches something that can be announced, this channel will be here. Every detail, every development, every answer that has been a long time coming. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Do not let this case leave your awareness. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. This community's attention is part of what keeps cases like Nancy's from fading before they should. Nancy Guthrie has not been found, but the investigation has not stopped, and neither have we.